Okay. All right, we're live again. Okay, so we're live. You might see some buffering. I'm getting some delays here on my side, but hopefully it's okay. Today's going to be the first day of Ecology, a unit called Dynamics of Ecosystems, and um, I'm getting some notifications here. There we go. That should be live now. Let's see if that shows up. Just double check a couple things. Yes, that looks good. Okay. All right. I'm getting a bunch of notifications in my classroom. So, oh, hey, all right. What's up? Good day. Nice to see everybody. Okay, great. Yeah, well, it's that's what it kind of feels like a little bit. I'm just reading some comments in the classroom. So yeah, you can also, if you chat in the live chat, then I will get some feedback there as well. It's good to see everybody kind of popping in there, um, and good to talk to you. Makes me feel a little less lonely when I know that there's somebody else out there, somebody watching. Hi, how's it going? All right, so today we're going to be talking about ecosystems. So this is a fairly short booklet. It's a little shorter than the last one. We're going to try to do this before in about a week or two, maybe 3 weeks. I don't know. We'll see, and then we'll move on to physics. So it's a nice little break unit. I like it a lot. There's a lot of cool, a lot of fun little things to discuss. I love this little diagram here. This is called the carbon cycle, and so in the carbon cycle is a very chemical way of looking at life. It's the idea that if we're all made of carbon, where did that carbon come from? And and so like from the really way down in that chemical, yeah, we need school. Yeah, I wouldn't mind being in a school too. Um, and so carbon, carbon makes everybody up, and it comes from somewhere. In our case, carbon comes from there's carbon in our atmosphere, and then plants take that carbon from the atmosphere, they turn it into sugars and starches and things like that. Animals eat those starches and sugars. They use the carbon from those sugars and starches to make their own bodies, to also for energy. And then other organisms eat those animals, and that becomes the carbon in their own bodies. So every carbon atom that's in you currently was at one point part of the atmosphere, more than likely. And that's pretty wild. I love that sort of idea of like everybody's interconnected. Even if we are like burning fossil fuels, those fossil fuels are going to become part of us at some point. Those are pretty wild and exciting concepts. So let's see if we can let's read this little introductory section here. In this unit, students examine the complex relationships present in ecosystems in order to further investigate issues of sustainability. The large-scale cycling of elements in biogeochemical cycles and the bioaccumulation of toxins in food chains are studied. Population dynamics are examined in the context of the carrying capacity and limiting factors of ecosystems. The concepts and implications of species biodiversity are explored as well. With the knowledge that they have gained, students investigate how human activities affect an ecosystem and use decision-making model to propose a course of action to enhance sustainability. So those are the goals of this course, of this unit. I think they're worthwhile goals. Let's see if we can do something with them. So, let me see if there's anything in here. One of the things is that this unit most connects with, it most connects back to grade 12 bio. So if you are looking for your next course, the next course after this would be grade 11 biology, but in fact, grade 11 biology is entirely focused on the human body and anatomy. anatomy and physiology. And the grade 12 course, on the other hand, has a large biodiversity component, which builds off of this idea of ecology. So if you like this unit, you might like grade 12 biology. At our school, at Winnipeg Adult Ed, we have often allowed students to just go straight into grade 12 biology because of the lack of requirement between them. So if that's something that's interesting to you, you like this, but you don't like human body stuff, then this is probably the unit. This is probably the route you might want to go. In the meantime, this is what I've been working on. So here is my chimpanzee skull. I 3D printed this using the school's 3D printer, which I have borrowed to get some 3D prints done. And this took 2 days to print, but it is speaking of biodiversity, I 3D printed this for my bio 40 class so that we could compare it to the human skull, and some interesting observations about how the eyes are about the same size as humans, and there's some interesting features in the way that their teeth and their nose and all that sort of stuff is organized. But at the back, there's some major changes from humans, where we have our brainstem connects closer to the middle of the brain, and this one connects closer to the back because the chimpanzees sort of hang their heads in a downward position, looking upwards more. So, talking about biology and things you can look forward to, this is playing around with skulls is one of those options. Okay. All right, my show and tell is over. My discussion is over. Let's get into it. Let's see. So there are some outcomes here. I'll probably post these up into a document soon so that we can start working on checking them off. And at the beginning of the unit, I've given you a little set of vocabulary that I would recommend that you review. Some of them we will explain as we go, but let's see if we have to pick out some right away. So when we talk about environment in this unit, we're talking about all of the surroundings. That includes all the plants, all the organisms, all of the all the microbes. Bacteria is something we don't often think about in terms of a environment, uh, but they are really important, especially in things like uh, it's really important for things like our human body. So our human body is an environment all on its own. Inside of our body is our bacteria, and those bacteria and the microbes that live in there, they have to be balanced, and they have to live in harmony. If they don't live in harmony, then we have things like gastrointestinal distress and all sorts of other uncomfortable things. So that's an environment. And ecology is essentially the study of environments. It's the study of how organisms interact. It was proposed by a German biologist there, Ernst Haeckel, and he coined that term in 1866. So ecology is something I've been concerned about for a long time, but it's a lot about the balance of physical and biological environments. So ecology is very much concerned about balance, concerned about balance. Just going to grab my streaming software. Okay, about balance of organisms. Well, you know what, we're going to use a new word in a second. It's about the balance of abiotic, biotic, and biotic. Wow, so tiny. Okay, select all. So ecologists, ecology. We used to have a department of ecology at the U of M, but that has been replaced with that's been incorporated into the greater biology department. But that is, that's one of our places we concern ourselves with and stuff. Okay. Abiotic. This is A is usually used as a negative. So this is biotic is living organisms. Abiotic is non-living. Um, a population is very important for biology. So this is any group of individuals of the same species in the same geographical area. We often talk about a species as being a population that can reproduce. So species, organisms that are able to naturally reproduce without artificial intervention, um, and species, organisms, we might even say something like a population of organisms or something like that, a population. Population of organisms which are able to naturally reproduce without artificial intervention. The community is any organisms that are interacting. So the ecology is studying the community. An ecosystem is all the different communities of organisms and abiotic factors of the environment inside of an area. These usually have, we usually define ecosystems by type. So we might be looking at a forest ecosystem or a boreal forest even, and that would be like a specific region in, say, upper Manitoba, northern Manitoba, sort of northeastern Manitoba would be a boreal forest region. And so that might be a boreal forest ecosystem, and then we would look at all the different communities in that ecosystem, because even within one forest, we might have different sections of the forest where there are different interacting populations. Um, there might be a community of fungi and bacteria and tree roots that are all interacting. That might be one community. They interact directly. And then there is the birds and the tops of the trees and the bugs that are all a separate community, but they're all within the ecosystem of the forest. The biosphere is, on the other hand, is all of life on Earth. So also the concept behind the movie Biosphere, which was a terrible Pauly Shore movie from back in the day that I still remember somehow. Um, and then biomes are terrestrial sets of ecosystems characterized by rainfall, temperature. A single biome occupies a large geographical area and usually found on more than one continent. So there are lots of types of biomes. So tropical rainforests is a type of biome, and they're found all over the place. Well, they're not found everywhere. They're found in different places. Okay, food webs. That's how different organisms are interconnected. A niche is, or a niche sometimes, if you're watching an American speak. I like niche, but they like niche apparently. Um, so this is the role an organism plays. This can be a difficult concept to wrap your head around. It includes what role they play in the food web. So who are they eating and who's eating them, and then also where they are in their habitat. And these can be really subtle differences. In Manitoba, we have several different types of warbler, which is a type of bird. And each of the warblers occupy a different niche in one way they differ. So there's, I believe, 3 types of warblers, maybe 4. They eat mostly the same food, but they eat mostly the same food. They have mostly the same predators, but they occupy different parts of the tree. That's it. So some warblers occupy the top branches of the tree. Some warblers occupy the edge branches in the middle of the tree, and some occupy the inner branches of the tree. They otherwise do not really interact with each other. These 3 different types of warblers will not interbreed. They have slightly different reproduction processes or different reproduction behaviors. So they don't interact through breeding. They just have the only difference in their niche is their occupancy of the tree. So niches are all of the factors, every single one of them that defines your role or this organism's role in the environment. Okay. And then we have our producers and our consumers. Producers are ones that make energy by converting sunlight into food, into their bodies. Autotrophs is another word. And consumers are those that eat things. These are also known as heterotrophs. So we'll try to bring these words up a little later too. So these are, let's put that over here. And heterotrophs. Heterotroph means to eat other. Autotroph means to make your own energy. So that's where autotrophs and heterotrophs. And we're going to come back to that in a bit. Okay, so let's get into this booklet. Look, we're already 4 out of 40 pages are already done. So we're already 10% of the way in. What is an ecosystem? So all the organisms in an area that interact with each other and their environment consist the ecosystem. There are 2 components. We have the biotic and the abiotic component. So the biotic component would be all the living organisms. So this would include, this will include, I don't know, plants, animals, fungi. Remember that funguses are not plants. Bacteria. Algae, if you like. Algae are also not plants. Are not plants and they're not animals. Yeah, and there's probably one other organism that we could think of, but that's okay. And then the abiotic component, this is the non-living part. So the non-living part is, things like sources of carbon and oxygen and nitrogen, as well as minerals. Even energy is a part of it. So weather is an interesting abiotic component. So weather and climate. Weather is a day-to-day event. Climate is a ongoing event. So when we're talking about the effects of climate change, we're talking about the change over long periods of time versus changes in weather, which are much shorter. Every day we have new weather, but for our climate to change, that means the general trend has to be changing. I just wanted to anytime you mention weather, I want to check what is the weather today. Great. I like that you guys are using the comments in Google Classroom. Those are really useful. If you ever want to drop any questions in the comment tree or in the comments on Classroom, that's totally welcome. Yeah, energy from the sun for sure. That would be an abiotic component as well. So energy here, this is any energy. So sun energy is a particularly good one. It's particularly important. Certainly, It changes the ecosystem of the bottom of the ocean where there's not very much sun compared to to the tropics or to tropical rainforest or something. Even a tropical rainforest, there's some issues with sunlight for those organisms that are close to the ground, right? The same type of plants can't grow in a tropical rainforest where there's lots of shade inside the forest, and the tops of the trees are very tall, and they sort of cover up and protect those stop those lower plants from getting sunlight. Okay. Hmm. Ecosystems are fundamentally different based on their unique combination of abiotic and biotic components and how these components ebb and flow through the environment. Speaking of the sun, right? Those ecosystems closer to the North Pole or to the South Pole have less sun, and that's a huge effect on what kind of plants and what kind of animals and things are going to be able to grow in that area. Because once you have less sunlight, you have less heat. Less heat means less heat is less warm. So you don't want to. So the same sort of animals can't live in those areas. Energy flow and trophic levels. So the energy necessary to sustain life on Earth originates from the sun, or in rare cases from thermal emissions, like in the bottom of the ocean. Producers, so the sun is our key to life in a way. Producers convert energy from the sun to chemical energy that is stored in the cells of the organism. So producers, um, the cells of the organism. So here we're talking about plants and algae. Since algae don't really count as plants, we have to separate those out and mention them as separate pieces. So I'm just going to watch my video flow here so I don't knock too many things out. My camera. The term for an organism that converts sunlight to usable energy is autotroph. Autotroph. So auto means self, and trophic means feeding. Auto means automatic, I guess, actually, but oh well. So self-feeding, maybe that's what this auto means. Self-matic, I guess that makes sense. Okay, so autotroph means self, and trophic means feeding. So these are things that can produce their own food. So, what we're saying is that they produce their own food. Produce their own food. In fact, although the plant does make sugars and things that we can eat, it's really making those sugars for itself. And that's why generally plants aren't very tasty. They're only making enough sugar for the plant to survive, and a large portion of the plant is not tasty. Right? Like roots and things don't taste that good. But they do all have sugars, and those sugars are from the sunlight that they use to make them. It's because they do need those sugars to survive, uh, and the sugars they use throughout their own cells to make them. But then in some ways through intervention, like human farming, we've taken some of the sweetest parts of the plant and we've bred them to be larger. So that's why now potatoes, what used to be just a little bulb on the root, now is large. We have these large, heavy potatoes full of starch, which is lots and lots of energy in there. All of that energy came from the sun initially. So all the energy that's stored in those starches that are inside those potatoes, that's all from the sun, plus the carbon in the environment, plus the water and a little bit of nitrogen. But really powered by the sun. Before humans were breeding plants, before we started domesticating plants, those potatoes would have been very, very small and would have just been there to encourage animals to come dig those plants up so that they could spread the seeds around. But now, with human intervention, we've supercharged those, made them very large, and now potatoes really aren't going to grow very well on their own. They do need humans to provide them with fertilizer and other factors to keep them alive. Lots of water. The opposite of an autotroph is a heterotroph, which means other feeding. So hetero means other. So the other feeders, and so that means that they are herbivores who eat plants. Can I explain banana? Uh, sure. Yeah, we can talk about a banana. So bananas, again, they were a plant that produced very small fruits. And then through human intervention, human breeding, we've bred the plant to have larger and larger fruits. The initial banana had a lot of seeds in it. If you want to sort of get a simulation for something what a banana might have tasted like before humans started breeding them, they used to taste somewhat like plantains, but starchier. Um, and then we found one variety of banana that we ended up growing and duplicating, and that was the Cavendish banana. Apparently, the Cavendish banana used to tasted a lot like banana medicine, and then the Cavendish banana went extinct or nearly extinct in the 1960s or 70s, something like that. And there's now we now or no, now we eat the Cavendish, and it used to be the Big Al banana. Anyways, all bananas now are derived from another tree, and that tree has very delicious fruits, but the tree is infertile, so the tree can't mate naturally. So we actually make cuttings of the tree, cut off the branches, and plant them on other stumps and things, and then we propagate the plant through that kind of thing. Does that help? Is that too deep a question? I do a lot of talking about banana in my Bio 40 class. So if you like talking about bananas, you should join me in Biology 40S, and we'll spend a whole day on talking about bananas. Uh, So heterotrophs, these are things like us. Anything that eats others. Human beings eat other animals. We also eat other plants, or well, not other plants. We eat plants. So we eat lots of different foods, and so that makes us a heterotroph. Herbivores who are plant eaters, those are also heterotrophs. Carnivores that are meat eaters, those are heterotrophs. Omnivores eat all kinds of food. There's also something called a detrivore. Detrivores are what we also call detrivores and decomposers. They are things that break down organisms from the other levels, but they're also heterotrophs. So there is, I believe, now, I'm just going to double check my definitions about what's the difference between a detrivore. Yeah. So a detrivore is so detrivores, they specifically eat so they eat decomposing bodies, decomposing plants and animals, and as well as feces. Um, got the oh, okay, and faces. There we go. Decomposers. Decomposers they actually break down they break it down at the chemical level. So decomposers break down dead organisms. Uh, chemical level, and they directly absorb nutrients. I think it's getting long enough that I should probably type it, so I'm just gonna convert to text here. So detrivores, they eat decomposing plants, feces, and animals, and they absorb nutrients through digestion. The decomposers, they break down the dead organisms at the chemical level directly. And so not using digestion. So that's a little bit of a difference. Some examples of a detrivore, if you think about it, classic example, usually in lots of cartoons, and that would be vultures. Vultures would be a classic example. Vultures, earthworms, maggots, etc. Meanwhile, decomposers are actually really rare. There are only a couple of examples of decomposers. One example is uh, funguses or fungi and bacteria. Right now, there's a big search on for decomposers that can break down plastics, for example. So uh, they're searching detritivores. So they're searching for a bacteria that could decompose plastic, and that would mean that the plastic uh, would be broken down at the chemical level, not just digested. Certainly, one of the problems right now is that organisms are digesting plastic and it's not being broken down. Um, so yeah, that's a bad thing. We want decomposers, we want bacteria and microorganisms that can break down the plastic at the chemical level, and that's going to be that's going to be one of the goals right now of science, is to try to discover an example of this. Okay, so cellular respiration is the process found in these autotrophs. Actually, it's a process found in all the heterotrophs and all organisms. Um, so this is found in all organisms for the most part. I think there might be a couple of examples of bacteria that don't use this, but they're pretty rare. I should probably say almost all organisms. And this is the idea that we can take glucose plus oxygen to form carbon dioxide and water. And we should probably add one more product here, which is energy. So we get energy out of this reaction. And that energy then goes on to power your cells, power the chemical reactions in your cells, and all of the little organelles and all the parts of your cell to cause it to work. So every time that I move my arm, what I'm actually doing is I'm taking the sugars in the cells are being burned at that point. They're being broken down. The sugars in the cell is being turned into chemical energy, typically a form called ATP. And then that ATP is being used to cause the muscle cells in my body to contract. And then each time, each of those contractions costs energy, and it moves my arm up or down, because if you have to still contract energy in your muscle cells to cause your arm to extend as well. And so every movement, speaking right now, I'm using muscles in my diaphragm to push air through my body. All of these things require energy. All of that's coming from the sugars. Um, in general, the sugar I ate this morning is probably not doing much for me. It's probably sugar from yesterday, but I still need to continue to supply my body with sugar so that it can continue to do this sort of action. The amount of nutrient energy from producers that is available to support life is called the net productivity of that producer. And this amount will depend on things like the sunlight, the nutrients available, the temperature, the moisture, the environment. Different organisms, ecosystems obviously different uh, have different plants and different net productivity. I'm going to put a text box here, I think. Okay. Different ecosystems obviously have different net productivities, which changing which organisms can live in those environments. We measure our energies in lots of different units, but one that's very common is the calorie, or joule. Typically, if you're doing chemistry, we're going to use joules a lot more. If you're doing anything that has to deal with animals or humans particularly, we like to work with the calorie. So 1 calorie is the amount of energy needed to raise the temperature of water, 1 gram of water. So it's 1 calorie is the amount of energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree. So it's a very small amount. I hope that to you seems small. I don't believe it's meant to be a very large amount of energy. It's about 4 joules. So I don't know. Does that mean anything? Not that much. It doesn't mean much to me, at least. Uh, but when we go to talk about the calories or the productivity of an environment, we're going to look at that productivity as calories per meter squared. So calories per area. Meter squared is a measure of area. So most of the energy that is consumed goes to daily activities of an animal. That includes your cellular respiration, that includes your growth and reproduction, includes the waste matters and death. Um, all of these things are where you're going to use your energy. So even dying requires energy, and it also releases energy a little bit. The amount of energy that gets transferred between any two trophic levels is between 5 and 20%. So we're going to get to, what we're getting to is essentially a mathematical description about about how energy transfers between the different levels of a food web. So at the bottom of the food web, we're going to have our plants who can produce their own energy straight from the sun. And then those plants are going to be eaten. And when those plants get eaten, the amount of energy stored inside those plants will the amount of energy stored in that side of those plants, only about 5 to 20% of it, so about 10% on average, of the energy in those plants can actually be transferred to the next organism. So, a farmer puts, all this energy into growing a field, this field of corn. We don't eat 100% of the corn, right? You only eat the corn cob. And out of the corn cob, you only eat the little corns, right? The corns on the corn cob. So the rest of the plant required energy to grow. It required daily input of energy to keep it alive. It requires sunlight to constantly be on the plant to keep it alive. It requires constant application of water and fertilizers to the plant to keep it alive. So out of the energy that a plant absorbs through its lifetime, when we go to eat that plant, we can only really take in maybe 10% of it. So lots of energy is going to be left over in the remains of the plant. So lots of stalks, that the stalks are going to be broken down and or have energy still in them. When you take the shuck when you shuck up corn, all that green stuff, that was energy at one point. That was energy that went into that. Okay, so then we combine that with the next step, right? So energy in the sun hits the planet, and then so some amount of energy, and about 10%, it gets transferred to the next generation or to the next consumer. So that gets to the primary consumers. If you're a vegetarian, you're a primary consumer. If if you're a carnivore or an omnivore, human beings tend to be omnivores, but that's changing all the time. Um, this means that 90% of the energy is lost to time. Uh, if you are an omnivore or a herbivore of some sort, then you're the one who's going to be absorbing that 10%. If a, if a time comes where the herbivore is consumed itself, so if it's a cow or a pig or a goat, and it's put to slaughter for food, or if we're in the wild and it's a snake, and a snake comes by to eat it, out of the amount of energy that went into that organism, only about 10% of it can really be transferred to the next generation. This is assuming that every piece of meat of that organism, anything that's edible, is being eaten. Because the majority of the energy was lost in the day-to-day activities of that organism. You know, you consume energy all day long, right? We're eating all day. Lots of people are, maybe eating 3 times a day or once or twice a day, maybe a big meal, whatever. But you're always putting food into you, but you're not getting any bigger. Well, some of us are getting bigger, but you're not like getting as big as the amount of food you're putting in. You're putting in tons of energy, uh, you're putting in more energy than your cells need to store because you have to move. And the more you move, the more energy you consume. Look at if you guys are familiar with The Rock or whatever, he can eat like this guy is a guy who's paid to work out, and he eats, in a single day, he eats, thousands and thousands of calories. But The Rock's not becoming, the Incredible Hulk. He's not like 20 feet tall now because so all of that energy, it gets used up. And so the amount of, increase in size for The Rock is never going to be equivalent to the amount of energy he's putting into himself. And the amount of size you're going to grow by eating food is never going to be really equivalent to the amount of energy you're putting in. You're going to always use up a bunch of that energy just moving around, just walking and talking and just breathing even uses energy. So if something's going to eat an animal like a mouse, they're only going to be able to get about 10% of the energy that mouse consumed over its entire life. And that means that about 90% was lost. And so if you're going to go ahead and eat some snakes, maybe you're an owl or something that eats snakes, then you only get 10% of that snake's life by the same count. This creates some really interesting math in a second um, about this sort of circle of life idea. And I'm already looking at the clock and running out of time, so I don't want to spend much more than an hour on this, but for today, so we'll just talk a little bit about. We'll try to finish this up. This circle of life can be arranged into what is called an energy pyramid, where we show that the energy that has to go into the amount of producers to support the consumers is always going to sort of be levels of decreasing value. So most ecologies will have a decreasing number of individuals as the trophic levels increase, although it depends largely on the type of plants and animals that we have. Um, a period of numbers labels the trophic levels by the number of individuals, and a pyramid of biomass labels the trophic levels by the mass of the living creatures. An energy pyramid lists the calories produced by each trophic level. So here is our period of numbers. So in this case, we have sort of, if we had 809 individual plants, then for those 809 individual plants in this ecology, we would expect about 37, a ratio of 809 to 37 for the number of consumers. This is a forest ecology, so it has some large consumers like the moose. So those moose are going to consume more plants, and so the number is going to be pretty small. For the total number of moose, white-haired deer, snowshoe rabbits, and lemmings that would be survivable in this environment. This is all sort of this is a ratio. So this is not like there's not 1.5 lynxes kicking around. We're talking about if there's 30 lynxes, then there is 11 times more garter snakes and wrens and pygmy shrews. So from these animals, we also have the secondary consumers. Some of these secondary consumers include the winter wren. This would be a bird that eats bugs. Bugs primarily eat plants, so when a bird eats those bugs, they become a secondary consumer. Pygmy shrews, which will also eat lots of bugs, and snakes that also will eat some lemmings and rats and rabbits maybe. Those will be secondary consumers, and then the tertiary consumers are ones that are going to eat some of these other animals. So the gray owl will also eat the pygmy shrew. The winter wrens maybe even eat garter snakes. Lynxes will eat anything, so they are at the top of the pyramid. So in an environment, because of this small energy transfer between levels, there are less and less organisms at each of the higher levels. So as we go up the level, we will have less organisms. So that's the pyramid of numbers, just simply by count. If we think about by biomass, then we might have a pyramid of numbers like this. Seems to be the same setup as my other one. I'll have to double check my pyramid of numbers. So in my pyramid of biomass, then we can compare the amount of kilograms per meter squared. So how much actual mass of animals and plants do we have? And so we have the most animal and plant mass, simply how much carbon, nitrogen, and hydrogen there are that makes up these primary producers. We've got a whole bunch of those at the bottom. We get less and less as we go up, and that's all because of that 10% rule. If we compare the amount of energy that has to go in, then the amount of energy that goes in, so for example, we get about 1,000,000 joules if we got 1,000,000 joules from the sun, then we would store about 10,000 joules in our producers. So that'd be 10,000 joules ready to be consumed. I believe that is 10%. So this is 10%, right? And then there is out of those plants, there's 10% of the plant is available for energy. Um, and so then the snails eat that 10%, and then from the snails, there's going to be another 10% of the snail is available for energy. The other 90% used up in its actions throughout the day and through its growth is growing. So out of those snails, there's only 10% available for frogs. There's only 10% available for foxes. So one concept to think about is that for a fox to get energy, it has to pretty much be eating all the time. And this is probably one of the most amazing things that a bear can do is actually find enough food so that it can hibernate for the winter. Um, because not only does the bear need to feed itself just to keep its daily activities going, but it also needs to eat, eat enough so that it can survive through the winter on its stored food. All right. So we'll fill out this energy pyramid tomorrow as part of our review of this first section. Try to spend a little bit of time with the introductory part and the definitions at the beginning. And if you can, try to do that activity, the YouTube sort of quiz activity that I posted on the classroom. I forget what we called it. It's labeled the Play Pose It. So it's an interactive YouTube video with some quizzes embedded in it. Otherwise, we will talk to you tomorrow. Thanks for everybody coming out. We had 7 people at one point today, so that's awesome. That's higher than my chemistry class for once. So great on you to get out there and get inside and watch these videos. And I'm looking forward to talking to you tomorrow. Okay, take it easy, and we'll talk to you soon.